Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the SimpleBiz360 podcast. And we're so appreciative today. We have Amada Blackwood with us. And Amanda, hello, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, if you could.
Hi, Jeff. It's good to see you again, my friend. So I am an advocate for those who have survived trauma. I'm an author, artist, public speaker, and survivor myself of human trafficking. So I know we're going to be talking a lot more about that on this episode today, but I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share the message of hope and survival to others.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. And we really appreciate you being able to, share your story. And folks, if this is the first time you're with us, we do 3 business tips in 5 minutes. We help pay forward third-party advice from other people in business to help your businesses navigate the experience economy a little bit better. And what I love about Amanda's story is this episode is entitled Surviving and Helping Others, because Amanda, too, takes her past experiences and is built and dealing with helping other people now, survive and recover and get through a portion of our world, unfortunately, that's out there. And Amanda's going to talk about that today. So we are on YouTube TV. We're on Rumble TV. We are on Gab TV for the shorter shows and IGTV. And then we're on 28 audio platforms. So join us there, follow us, subscribe, give us a rating. And Amanda and I had an opportunity to meet through a podcast network about, hey, could you be on my show? Can I be on your show? We kind of got to know each other electronically, thought, hey, we both have some cool things to talk about. So I'm going to be on her show September 15th. And she is on here in the middle of July. Now, before we start, Amanda, the world has just been introduced. At the time we're taping now, the movie is about to come out in a couple days, and that is The Sound of Freedom, the story of Tim Ballard, Operation Underground Railroad. I know you've met Mr. Ballard, and, obviously it's a movie about human trafficking, child trafficking. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be informative. And here we are a couple of weeks. This show is going to air a couple of weeks after that. So it's appropriate timing and certainly a delicate matter. And without any further tee up, we would just love you to tell us a little bit about your, upbringing and where did you, what was your family like? Where did you grow up, Amanda?
My upbringing is a little bit dicey. So my father was in the military. I was actually born in Germany, though I do not have any kind of German citizenship because both my parents were Americans. Okay. We are one of the few nations in the world where you can get citizenship just by being born on American soil. Okay. Most other nations don't have that. So I am just straight up Heinz 57 American. We moved back to the States when I was about 2.5 years old. So I don't remember a whole lot about Germany. Okay. And then we moved all over the country for many years after that. I grew up in a really abusive household, though. It was me and my older brother. As far as I can remember, my earliest event of abuse happened when I was about 4 years old. I was molested by him. My father was physically abusive. My mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. So I grew up in this really damaging area where I felt like I was completely isolated and unloved, and I started seeking out love and attention from wherever I could at a really young age.
And Amanda, thank you for sharing that. That story sounds eerily probably familiar for a lot of people. Do you have any figures on that? Do you know anything about that statistic at all? About kids that grown up in abusive homes?
I know that most victims of human trafficking have grown up in abusive homes. It's not to say that everybody who grows up in an abusive home ends up in the world of human trafficking, but it's definitely, there's a massive connection between them.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, certainly a tough childhood. So I would love you to share your story. The microphone is yours. Weave us along the path of life, if you could, to bring us up to where you are today. And then we've got a lot of questions. But the mic's yours, Amanda.
So I kind of established that there was a lot of abuse stuff happening when I was younger. When I started seeking out the attention from wherever I could get it from, I started with trying to get the attention from other kids in school, teachers in school. And at first it was cries for help. It was me in elementary school pretending to be sick so that I could get in the nurse's office and get away from the bullying kids, because I also dealt with a lot of that growing up. Sure. And trying to find ways to seek out and ask for help without actually asking for help specifically. I was taught not to do that. I started being molested by other family members and friends and strangers when I was 12. This continued on through until I started running away from home at 15. I was raped by somebody I thought was my best friend when I was 17. So with all these constant abuses being piled up, I didn't know anything outside of trauma for a long time. I mean, I also had some really great memories of my childhood. It's not to say that just because you grow up in an abusive household doesn't mean that you can't have good memories also. But this is the kind of pattern that happens when you start to develop this understanding and this belief that the people who hurt you are the people who love you, and vice versa. And one does not exist without the other. So if I ever ended up in a relationship where somebody wasn't actually violently hurting me in some way, I felt like that meant they also didn't love me. One did not exist without the other. At 18 years old was the first time I was trafficked. I was trafficked 3 different times in my life. The first time it was a man that was more than twice my age. He was my boyfriend. And he loaned me out as kind of a party favor to his best friend for a birthday weekend in Las Vegas. He said he couldn't go because he had to work, but that I was able to go and we could go and hang out together and just have fun. And the way it was presented to me, I thought that meant I was going to go to Las Vegas and ride the roller coaster at New York, New York. Instead, we got to the Hard Rock Cafe Hotel, where the palms were greased and the staff was told that I was allowed to get room service once a day and that they had to drop it off outside of the door and walk away before I could retrieve it. They were not to ask any questions, and they were paid well to do this. For 52 hours, I was trapped in that hotel room and I couldn't leave. The best friend, had my ID, and I didn't have a driver's license. I had no money. I didn't even have a key to the room. If I left the hotel room at any point, I would not have been able to go back in. If I left, I would have been on the streets of Las Vegas with no identification and no way to be able to support myself. At that point, I was a high school dropout with no GED and kind of a poor education. I didn't have options. I ended up having to put up with multiple rapes and assaults in that 52-hour period. He would go downstairs and gamble for a little while. Then he would come upstairs to rape me, go back downstairs and gamble and drink. And it just continued as a vicious cycle. He slept very little. When he did sleep, it was only for about 3 or 4 hours at a time. And then the whole cycle would begin again. At the end of this, we got back on a plane and went back to Arizona. And as soon as I had the first opportunity, I packed up my stuff and I left. I knew that I had grown up in an abusive household. I was not willing to put up with this. I didn't care that I had this emotional attachment to the guy who loaned me out and told me that I needed to be accommodating to his best friend. I was done. But that didn't stop him from pursuing me. And he chased me for many years. And he continually found me. I didn't know when I knew him that he had ties to organized crime. He had ways of being able to find me, and he didn't give up for a long time. But in my attempts to get away, at one point I found myself down in Florida. I had injured myself pretty bad and needed a knee surgery. My plan was to go there and stay with my dad's mother, my grandmother, while I got the knee surgery. And I was going to recover at her house and then get a job and leave and be on my own again. Be independent all over again. What I didn't know was that while I was on the way to my grandmother's house, my parents called her and told her she's running away from her problems again. If you take her in, we will never speak to you again. So when I called from the Daytona Beach bus station at 10:30 at night, my dad's stepfather answered and said, "We're not coming to get you. You're on your own. Good luck." And any teenager facing something like this is going to sit down on the curb of whatever street they're on and cry their eyes out. And that's exactly what I did. A young couple came up and found me, and they offered me a place to stay until I could get on my feet again. What they meant in reality was they were going to offer me a place to stay until they could find the highest bidder. because that's what happened. And they sold me to a man who said his name was Esteban. I was locked up in a small room for 23 and a half hours with no food, no water, and no bathroom facilities. But I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Back then, there was this really great TV show on called MacGyver. The guy could fix anything with a paper clip and a rubber band.
Sure.
And
Pack of gum too. Pack of gum too.
Right, exactly. He was amazing.
Right.
And I've written to Richard Dean Anderson and I told him this story. He's never responded, but I have to trust that he knows.
Sure.
The man is my hero. I love MacGyver. So in the middle of this incredibly intense and frustrating and terrifying place, I was able to calm myself down enough to sit down and think logically, what would MacGyver do?
Wow.
And I had a t-shirt that actually said that on it for a long time. I loved that shirt and wore it out. But I was able to MacGyver my way out of that room. And when I took off, of course, the guy was pursuing me. He was trying to track me down. He jumped in his car and was driving. I was on foot. And the first person that I saw when I got out of there was a female police officer in a car. And I flagged her down and I started screaming at her, just bubbling over with, this is what's all happened and I'm scared and I need help. This was one of the worst parts of Daytona Beach, Florida. Incredibly high crime rates, incredibly high prostitution. And she looked at me like I was insane. And I felt completely invisible. But she saw in her rearview mirror this guy that was trying to get me back. She saw him in the rearview mirror as he realized I was talking to a police officer. He pulled an illegal U-turn and she went after him. I never followed up. I didn't go back to the place where I was being held. I didn't go back to see if I could get anybody else out. And I knew there were others there. I lived with survivor's guilt for a long time. I did everything I could just to move on with my life. I'm going to skip forward to this point. At that point, I was 19 years old. I was on the run from everything and everyone. I figured what better place to hide than California. It was as far from Florida as I could possibly get. So I packed up and went to LA. My plan was to move out there and to be an assistant to somebody important, somebody famous. That was my ambition. Instead, I was on Alias and Will and Grace, and I modeled for Harley Davidson, and I did a lot of really cool stuff. But that was about the time that internet dating started becoming a thing. So in 2004, I met this man who lived out of the country, lived in Scotland, and he was just this really fascinating guy. He was smart and articulate. He was handsome and witty, and he had a little daughter who had bright red hair, and she was just absolutely the cutest little thing. We decided that since he lived so far away, we were only ever going to be pen pals, but we could be really close pen pals. And we stayed that way. But in this period of 7 years, eventually he came to visit me and I went to go and visit him. And we decided that we were in love. And he asked me to get a fiancé visa and move to Scotland to be with him. The land of kings and castles and queens and princesses. This is what every little girl who's ever grown up in a traumatic household dreams of. They dream of being rescued by this white knight. I'm thinking, this is it. This is my shot at happiness. I was 31 years old. So I gave up my job, which I was no longer anybody's assistant. I was a director of public safety and security for 6 properties in LA County, and I'd worked my way up from the bottom. I wasn't the assistant. I had an assistant. And I gave up my home and my car, and I packed up what I could in a single suitcase, and I went to Scotland. I got there in January of 2011. The snowflakes that were hitting the side of the window were as big as the palm of my hand. They were massive. It was freezing cold out there. It took that man 7 years to get me there. And it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Jeez.
It was heartbreaking. So that first week was a beautiful week. I got to hang out with his family and explore things, and we got to spend time together. But after that first week, that's when the abuse started. pretty much immediately, I tried to get an emergency flight out. I wanted to go back. Maybe I could still get my job back. Who knows? I had burned a lot of bridges, but anything would be better than this.
Sure.
I couldn't do this again. I got as far as getting my documents back from him. I got my debit card, my credit card, my passport, because he had taken all of those when I got there for safekeeping and putting them into a safe. And I got that stuff back from him by telling him that I was going to use these documents to go down to the local bank and extract what money I had from my bank account so that we could put it into his bank account and we could actually spend it. I didn't have much. It was about $2,000, maybe a little bit more. When I did this, instead of actually getting the money out of the bank, I immediately went onto my computer and I bought the first ticket that I could afford to get out of there. I was going to have to wait 5 days for the flight because I couldn't afford the first one out or the second one out. I had to wait. But this abuse continued during those 5 days to the point where somebody came over and abused me so badly that my kidneys started trying to shut down. And I was in the hospital when the flight left, and it was a non-refundable ticket. I lost everything. And I started to lose hope. It was within the next month that I tried to commit suicide. I had decided that I was going to take myself out with a train. I'd done research. It's like, this seems like this is going to be the best way to do this. And I went down to a train platform. At the time, I was a smoker and I had brought with me only one cigarette. It was going to be my last cigarette, so I wouldn't need more than one. And I sat there at the train platform and I lit my cigarette and I was waiting for the train to come. And a guy walked out on the platform and he also had a cigarette and he asked me for a light. And I handed him my little book of matches. And he looked at me. I told him, I said, you can keep those. I won't need them anymore. And the reason I said this was because I wanted him to ask me why.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Not, oh, you're going to quit smoking?
Sure.
Anything would have been nice. But he didn't ask. And I couldn't make him ask. It was like that little girl that was still crying out for help in the nurse's room, trying to find anybody to just find out what's wrong. And when he didn't ask, I gave up. He just handed me the matches back and he says, I won't need them anymore either. And that was it. That was the end of our conversation. And I felt so invisible until his little 4-year-old boy walked out onto the platform and took his daddy's hand. And this little boy looked at me, and it was the first time a human had actually seen me in months. I still, to this day, don't know how a 4-year-old child can see what everybody else on the planet is ignoring. And it took me about 20 seconds to realize that I wasn't running toward the train. I was running back toward my prison. And I was happy about it. Not because I knew that I was going to be subjected to more sport torture and rapes and horrible things, but because I knew that if I was being kept alive through everything that I was going through, there had to be more of a purpose to my life than what it was. I started leaving little breadcrumbs and started kind of dropping hints delicately here and there. I had, because of the way that I'd grown up, I had learned about psychology and about different things like what we used to call Stockholm syndrome.
Sure.
We now call trauma bonding. But I knew that he would understand what these things were also. So I needed to start building this case for myself to make him really believe that I had trauma bonding. I kept on working on it slowly, little by little, over a period of time. I had to be incredibly patient. And during this, part of the abuse that I was going through included sleep deprivation, food deprivation, and waterboarding. So I started having sleep deprivation hallucinations, and I wasn't sure from one day to the next if I had already dropped a breadcrumb, and I had to really watch every step I made. I had to be really careful. But towards the end of my visa there, I had a 6-month visa. I was on month 5 And I had dropped enough breadcrumbs that I felt like I had enough of a compelling case at this point. And I sat him down one night and said, the day that was written on our marriage visa, on our fiance visa, has already come and gone. We were supposed to have gotten married on that day. If I overstay my 6 months, I could get kicked out of the country of the UK and never be allowed back according to UK law. But what's more, you could lose your job if anybody finds out. I mean, you're a police officer. You're not supposed to break the law. But if you send me back to California, I can stay there for 6 months and then get another 6-month visa and come back to the UK and we can be together again. And if we do it soon, I could come back in time for Christmas and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Within 2 hours, he had purchased a round trip flight for me. One to get me back to California and one to land me back in Scotland in time for Christmas. And when I got back to California, of course, I disappeared as best I could. And just like what happened with the first one, he came looking for me. I remember him banging on the neighbor's door and seeing through the peephole and absolutely shaking. I was terrified. The neighbors didn't know me, so they didn't know who he was asking for. In California, nobody knows their neighbors, basically. And I was able to sufficiently hide, but I kept on moving. And eventually I moved out to Colorado in 2016, still trying to hide from this guy. But just having gotten away from him was not enough to make it end. He had taken photos and videos of me in these molestations and rapes. And every time I got a new job or a new set of friends, he was sending an email to these people or posting it publicly on photo sharing websites for the world to see. He was including information on how to find me through social media, or if he had any kind of contact information for me, he would include that contact information so that people could find me in person. In 2019, I found out he had done this on pornography websites and made me famous. I was recognized one day in a grocery store, I was on Alias and Will and Grace and modeled for Harley Davidson back in the day. I wasn't recognized for any of that. I was recognized for being raped in a pornography video. People believed that it was a fake rape scenario. It was devastating. I had no idea what I was going to do. So I reached out to an anti-trafficking organization out here in Colorado. They immediately set me up with a pro bono legal service to start contacting these different pornography websites and have this stuff pulled down. But then another organization immediately got me into therapy and counseling. And the first therapist that I saw, I traumatized her so badly that I do believe that she has now left the industry completely and she'll never practice again. And I hope she was able to then find somebody that she could talk to. But my second therapist was amazing. And I went in with my eyes wide open. I went in knowing exactly what I needed because of everything that I had faced and already tried to get myself through. And I told her, I said, number one, don't come at me with medication. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want to fix what's broken. And number two, don't walk on eggshells. Don't pull any punches. I'm tired of people treating me like I'm delicate, like I'm going to break in half. If I was going to break in half, that would have happened already. Tell it like it is. And she said, number one, I don't believe in subscribing to the idea of medication right out of the gate. And number two, I will never pull the punches because that's not who I am either. And because of this understanding that we had together, in about 1.5 years, we had already gone through EMDR. We had gone through tapping therapy. We had gone through all these different forms of therapy. And it was November of 2020. She said, I don't know that there's much more that I can do to help you. I can keep checking in with you once a month and see how you're doing. She says, but I don't think you need much more from me. Sure. But I know you well enough now to know that you're not going to stop with what it is that you're doing to help yourself. So what are your next steps? What are you going to do next? And I said, I've been hearing it in the back of my head for years now that God was telling me I needed to write my book. I had already written several books, but every single time he told me to write that book, I kept on putting off. I've got this other one I'm going to write first. I've got this other one. I've got this series that I'm working on. I kept on putting it off. I didn't want to have to face it. And finally, because of the counseling and therapy, I was finally ready and able to face it. Because he made me famous on a pornography website, he forced me to find the lion in my lungs. If people were going to keep finding me, they needed to understand why they were finding me. And finally, I decided it was time to write the book. So in the month of December of 2020, I sat down and wrote the entire 350 pages, front to back, the whole thing. And I was done with it. I couldn't believe how quickly it went. And when my therapist checked in with me in January, she said, "So how's it going?" That's like, "Yeah, I'm great." She says, No. How's the book going? Have you started it yet? I said, "Amy, I'm done." "Are you kidding me?" She said.
That's wild.
"Yeah, I'm done. It's in my editor's hands now." And she said, "Well, now what are you going to do? Because I know you well enough to know you're not done." Like, I don't know yet. She said, "Why don't you try painting?" I don't know how to paint. I'd never painted before in my life. I had done watercolors and finger paints when I was really little, but they always turned out looking like garbage. I had no idea what I was doing with painting. She said, "I'm going to send somebody over with canvases and brushes and some paints, and I don't care what it looks like. Just paint."
Right.
And I started to paint. Within 2 months, I sold my first painting to the anti-trafficking group that paired me up with my therapist. They made prints of it and then sold the prints to be able to help provide these same services to another survivor of trafficking. Within 5 months, my autobiography was published the same month that I had a painting that was sold to a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago, Illinois. And the Chicago Tribune wrote a story about the painting called "Carry Your Own Baggage," because in life, we all have to carry our own baggage for a long time until we find a safe place to set it down. I was so proud in that moment, and I knew that I had finally really found more of a purpose.
Right.
I was not somebody else's punching bag. I was not somebody else's sex object.
Right.
I was a human being with a voice, and I was going to start using it. I learned how to get up on stages and start talking. I was terrified to do it at first. I was terrible at it. I shook constantly. But I've turned that anxiety into excitement now, because I know every single time I'm up there, there's an opportunity for me to touch at least one life and to teach somebody and to show them that you can, it doesn't matter what you've been through. You can climb back out of that darkness and you can grow from that.
Right. Wow. So, are you still in active recovery now with a therapist, or where are you at this point with your recovery, if you don't mind me asking?
I have not seen or talked to a therapist since 2001. But that doesn't mean that the fight is over. It's never really over. If you have PTSD, it's something that sticks with you all your life. There are certain things that we can do to help fight back against them. I've learned through my own research and through the workbook series that I'm currently writing that trauma reactions are things that happen to us when we are triggered from a past event. And when we don't correct these actions and when we lash out at somebody who means no ill will towards us, we're building these and supporting and enhancing these neural pathways that are built in our brains. We have to stop, take a step back, and understand that this is a trauma reaction. This has no basis in reality. These people are not here to hurt us, and we have to start retraining our brain. And while I've been able to successfully do that with most of my trauma reactions, that's not to say that PTSD is gone forever. It's not. There is no cure. PTSD is a brain injury, not just a mental illness. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and expect to be gone.
Yeah.
It's with you forever.
Yeah.
There's many things that I'm able to do now on my own to be able to fight back against them. And I don't have to rely on therapy or medications, but I do have to rely on my support network. And that is the man I met 1 month after my autobiography was published, my husband.
Nice. So you got a stable person in your life, which obviously is, very, very important to a lot of people, including myself. So yeah, so that is awesome. So you wrote your autobiography, and what year was this that it came out? 2020, is that right?
I wrote it in December of 2020.
Okay.
It came out on my 10-year anniversary of freedom from trafficking, which was June of 2021, June 19th of 2021.
Okay. And so you haven't spoken to your therapist since 2001 or 2021?
2021.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. That's what I thought. Okay. So, well, I appreciate you telling us that. I do have some more questions, but folks, this is one of the reasons I was so compelled to have Amanda on the show, is because you're now in a position where you're not only learning, how you are recovering or have recovered in some cases, but are recovering still. And you're now in a position to pay it forward. So I think that, what's interesting is, folks, if you don't understand how big the industry of human trafficking is, you're not watching the right things. You're not listening to the right people. I know mainstream media will not touch this. I know celebrities will not touch this. You will not see this on your favorite celebrities' posts and everything. But this is a huge industry, and there is just huge, and America has a humongous appetite for it. My wife and I, 2 years ago, through Operation Underground Railroad, Amanda, we kind of just one day scratched our heads and realized, wow, here we are, how much we don't know about this subject matter and how much was revealed to us, and then how much we've gone down some of these, rabbit trails the last couple of years just to learn more and more about it. And, I think what we've all seen in the last couple of years is that there's the censoring of information, the surfacing of truth. And truth, I always say, is like a basketball. You try to hold underwater, eventually it comes up. And I think the world is starting to see the basketballs coming up to the top, the truth of what's really going on out there. And that this is, there's some lessons to be learned. There's some people this podcast is designed for, so that they can hear it, they can share it with someone else, they can pass it on. You have your own podcast, and you have many instances where you've shared your story with other podcasters and, speaking events and so forth. So what I'd like to just do is ask you a couple questions, and then we'll get into how somebody could get a hold of you for a speaking event or anything. But here's what I would love to just ask you is, knowing what you know now, if you could go back, and we hear this question asked sometimes in creative capacities, what would you go back and tell your younger self? What advice would you give your younger self to maybe help avoid some of the things you were swept up into and taken up into?
Probably the first thing that I would do is give myself a great big hug. The one that I needed back then. And tell myself that I am worthy of love, mm-hmm. and that I am loved, mm-hmm. and it's okay. Mm-hmm. And that I'm so much stronger than I think I am.
Absolutely.
I think some of the best words of advice that I could have ever given myself are the same words of advice that I give to people now. We have grown up hearing the phrase constantly, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that is a lie. Friedrich Nietzsche said those words in the 1800s and then died in an insane asylum. I think we can let go of his phrases now. Mm-hmm. We have that strength within us. It's always been there. It's not what doesn't kill us that makes us stronger. It's God, it's ourselves, it's our beliefs. The people who do these things to us, who dig these holes that we can't get out of, they don't deserve the credit for making us stronger. Mm-hmm. We don't need an apology from our abusers. I know there's a lot of people out there who want that apology, who think that they've been wronged and they deserve that apology. And you might deserve the apology. That doesn't mean you're ever going to get it. And you don't need it. You don't need to put your own mental health and your own assurance back in the hands of the people who took it away from you in the first place while you're waiting for them to say, I'm sorry. That's not what forgiveness is about anyway. You don't need to hear that to forgive somebody for what they've done to you, because forgiveness isn't about you stepped on my foot and said, I'm sorry. And I said, oh, it's okay. That's not forgiveness. That's excuse. That is allowance. Forgiveness is taking all of that anger that has been balled up all of these years, everything that you've had to face and deal with and go through, and saying, I don't care anymore about being angry. I can let go of that anger and I can move on with my life. I can have something productive and healthy and better now, because that's not where I am anymore. That's forgiveness.
Amen. Well, and thank you so much for sharing that. So folks, if you hear this and you're a young person and you're hearing this, I mean, you would have given yourself a hug, and there is a hug out there. There's a big hug out there, and it's called Jesus Christ. And, it's hard, but, in a world where you're alone and you feel isolated and you're in a household that nobody says they love you, you don't get, loved on, there's just, and there's only abuse. There is one avenue, and that is, going to Jesus Christ and accepting him as your Savior, because he will hug you. He will love you. He will provide that. And you will learn, that God is love. And so, it's not the answer. It's not going to, make everything go away, but it's certainly, you said it, and I'm just expounding on it, that, you would give yourself a hug when you were younger. So amen. So I thank you for that. So recovery today, you're writing this. You're obviously still, this is still probably, you think about it every day, right? I can't imagine you don't. Is that right or wrong?
Actually let most of it go. I think about it when I'm talking about it, when I'm on stages, when I'm on podcast interviews, but being able to write it out in the book allowed me to release so much of it.
That's great.
That it's incredibly healthy now. Now, when I live my day-to-day life, I don't have to think about this stuff. I think instead about, what am I doing today? And what are my plans with my husband this weekend? Right. And why is the cat screaming? Just random things like that.
Well, that's why they make windshields bigger than rear view mirrors. Because, if you can look through the windshield at what you've got in front of you, rather than keep looking at this little mirror and looking behind. I mean, it's hard, easy for some people to say, myself included in many cases, although I'm a recovering alcoholic and, a drug dependent guy. But, hey, it's certainly a great way to look at life, at the glass half full. Let's see what's in front of us. So again, that's something that once you get, but I don't want to minimize the fact that you just didn't jump from your situation into the attitude, mindset you're in now. You had to work. You had to go through the proper care to get there. And that's what I don't want anybody listening to this podcast to miss, is you can't really, it's hard to do this on your own. Is that not right?
Oh, absolutely. And it had to get a lot worse before I ever got any better.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so the support. So you get your support from your husband now. But as you were going through this transition, if I'm dating your story back correctly, let's say somewhere in that 2016 time zone, as you started finding some realistic help. Correct my years if I'm off base there, but how important was that at that time in your life to have that network of the people you could depend on, that were reliable, that you could begin to extend trust to?
The anti-trafficking organizations were absolutely vital. I had gotten to know them because I went to an anti-trafficking conference and I had seen these people speak. If I hadn't gone to this thing, first of all, I wouldn't have realized that what I went through even had a name. I thought it was domestic violence before that. But they defined it and broke it down and shared that in the actual definition of human trafficking, the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person, there's no mention of money. So that's not prostitution. There's an overlap. It's not only happening to children because there's not an age listed there. And there's no mention of transportation. So human smuggling is a separate issue than human trafficking also. They're all issues that all need to be addressed. But they broke down what human trafficking was. And I realized what it was. That started all of this for happening for me. Then the anti-trafficking organizations had a group of survivors that would meet weekly, and we would go through what we called a life skills class. Some days we were learning how to balance a budget. Some days we were learning how to write short stories. And some days we were learning how to draw a pretty picture. Wow. But having that sense of community and sitting in a room with other people that we knew had been through something that was probably similar, we didn't have to share our stories to know that we each just understood. We got it. Yeah. It was a survivor-led group, and that sense of community was so important to me.
Yeah. Awesome. So, you know, when did the wheels start clicking that you really wanted to, you know, you talked about it earlier that, you know, the purpose of life, the matches, the train on the platform there, that incident in life, it kind of, it was I'm going to say, for lack of a better phrase, it was kind of a tipping point for you. Something happened. There was an epiphany there that took place that reignited your efforts to go in, you know, another direction, if you will. I mean, it seems like it. So in that sense, when did you really realize that you are a gift from God that is now supposed to share your story and help others with your story and share with others?
I think I continued to live in fear for so long because I was afraid of God. I was afraid that maybe I was that one that couldn't be forgiven. Mm-hmm. I was too broken. I was too damaged. I spent a lot of time in that place of fear. And it wasn't until that last breaking tipping moment in 2019 where I was recognized in a grocery store for being in a pornography that it really started to change my mindset. Okay. And I started to speak up. It's like, you know what? It is what it is. And if I don't own this, it's going to own me for the rest of my life. And I can't live like this anymore. Mm-hmm. I have to fight back. I have to regain some sense of control over my life. And that was when I hit my knees and said, God, please help me do this. I can't do it on my own. And there was that change. Yeah. And I started out really quietly speaking up. Very, very quiet. I sounded like a mouse. I was still a little bit of a doormat. I was still allowing people to push me around and take my story from me and exploit my story for their financial gains. Some anti-trafficking organizations will do that. And eventually I found there was a lion in my lungs. And I started speaking up, not just for me, but for all the others that have been silenced. Less than 2% of all victims of human trafficking get out with their lives. I started to recognize that God did keep me alive because I had a lion in my lungs, because I have this ability to speak and to write and to do so with passion and to make people feel something. I wasn't the gift. Jesus was the gift. He already took care of all my sins. There was nothing that I could do that would make God not love me and not need me and want me on this earth. I'm here because he wanted me to be here.
Yeah. Amen. Well, that's compelling. And that's, you know, that hits the heart. I mean, I have that conversion in my life where I was chasing really stupid things and I was self-destructive. And, you know my story because you interviewed me on your podcast, but, December 24th, 1987, I accepted that gift and everything changed. And it was the eighth spark plug in my 8-cylinder engine where I had only been running on 7 and been trying to fill that last spark plug slot with everything I could, you name it. I was trying and it wouldn't work. And when I finally let Jesus come in and be the 8th spark plug, in essence, the engine stopped hissing, life got more, joyous, and things started just becoming clearer and clearer to me. And I think that, and same conversion you went through, right? You've been a Christian for how long now? If you don't mind me asking.
My Christianity has always been kind of an unusual thing. Just briefly, I ran away from home on Sundays when I was a child to go off to church.
Interesting.
When I was like 8, 9 years old, and I'd be harshly punished for this. And I was in and out of churches for a long time. And with everything I went through, I gave up on church for a long time. But when I moved out to Colorado in 2016 is when I started attending church regularly.
Awesome.
Because of my past, because of the traumas, I was terrified of getting baptized in front of other people. And eventually when I did get baptized, it was April of 2021, right before my book came out. I was baptized with 2 other survivors of human trafficking in a very small, intimate group of people in a church. And a lady who had been absolutely vital in my recovery and who worked with this anti-trafficking organization is the woman who did my baptism. That was April of 2021. So I've been a believer my whole life, but I wasn't really all in until 2021.
Great. Awesome. Well, that's, praise God. That's awesome stuff. And I know this stuff hits home. Well, let's talk about that windshield now. Let's look forward. How is Amada Blackwood helping people today? How can people get you, on the docket for a speaking gig? Tell us about what you're doing today to help other people.
I absolutely love doing public speaking. So definitely, if anybody out there needs a speaker I've done international summits and stage speaking for a couple of years now, definitely reach out. It's easy to find me through growthfromdarkness.com, or you can send me an email, growthfromdarkness@gmail.com, or author@AmandaBlackwood@gmail.com. I'm willing and able to discuss any of these opportunities. But one of the biggest things that I'm doing right now, I've got my 2 different podcasts where I'm talking about trauma and overcoming it. I've got The Survivors and I've got Growth from Darkness, but I also have a workbook series I'm working on. The first book came out earlier this year. It's about the stages of trauma so people can dive in and figure out where they are in their recovery and what they've been going through and what their next steps are. The next book I'm still working on, it's about the trauma reactions, the long-term consequences of them, and how to fight back to have a better life. The next 2 books after that are going to be about healthy boundaries and something that I haven't seen anywhere yet, how to support a survivor. These are going to be really kind of, it's a great series to go through as a survivor or as somebody who knows someone who has survived any kind of trauma.
Sure.
You can learn so much more about it just by educating yourself on what it all is.
Sure. Absolutely. Great. And then you do speak now. Are you speaking to at a lot of churches? I mean, is that another venue for you to speak at? Will it women's groups or, churches in general?
Churches are probably my most popular venue.
Okay.
I got an opportunity to drive down to Arizona and speak on April 30th at a very, very small church that has just been planted in the last couple of years by a very dear friend of mine. It was in a small town called Heber Overgaard, Arizona, and it was the best experience. I remember when I walked out on the stage, God put it in the back of my head. It's like, you're not alone out there. And I knew in that second, I knew what he meant. And I walked out there and I did something I've never done before. And I said, looking out here right now, I know that I'm not alone. And by the end of today, one of you is going to know that what you went through wasn't just domestic violence. It's called human trafficking. And I thought I figured out who it was. There was a young lady there that had her hat. She was kind of shading her eyes and she's covered in tattoos. And I'm thinking, I bet that's her. Instead, it was the 64-year-old piano player. You never know who someone might be or what they've been through.
I'm so glad you said that because, okay, so, there's no stereotypical, visual key, prompting we get out here in society. So if you could, I don't know if you're equipped to answer this question, but, if we see something, who do we turn to? In public? I mean, if we think there's something going on, and I mean, who do we turn to? Who do we say something to?
And that is such a great question. There are so many law enforcement agencies that aren't quite up to speed yet on what human trafficking looks like. And you see all these headlines about 167 arrests made in human trafficking sting, but you have to ask yourself who these people are. they're arresting the people who are purchasing sex. And those people are then let off with a fine of between $80 and $120. It's about the same as driving up to a limit line at a red light. And they're arresting the people who are being trafficked. They're arresting the prostitutes who are then getting rap sheets and feeling like they are further victimized by law enforcement. It's one of the worst things in the world that you can do in most cities, to call the police on something like this, because they're not arresting the pimps. They're not arresting the traffickers. They can't figure out who those guys are. And there's such a small percentage of them that when they do get them, they're actually prosecuted properly and do serve time. Such a tiny percentage. I think probably one of the best things that we can do to help other victims of human trafficking is to get them in touch with the resources that are appropriate for their needs. Now, in my story, I didn't find these resources until after I had already been out. But if I knew these resources existed, and if I had known at the time that what I was going through was called human trafficking, I absolutely would have been calling those people when I was there in Scotland rather than trying to go to the train. I would have done anything to find resources available to me. I felt like I couldn't because the man that was trafficking me was a police officer. And that's not to say that all law enforcement's evil and they're bad and there's corruption on every level. There might be. But I always equate it to living in an apartment complex. The one neighbor on the one side might be a really wonderful couple, and they invite you over to their house every weekend for a barbecue, and the guy on the other side beats his wife every weekend. You never know. You can't just blanket statement trust somebody because they've made a particular career choice. You know, we have to understand that if somebody is being exploited, their biggest fear is going to be further exploitation by somebody else. Vet the organizations that we work with. Make sure that they are doing the hard work. Make sure they do have resources available for victims of trafficking. Make sure that, we talk about kids all the time in trafficking. They make 1/4 of all victims worldwide. Most anti-trafficking organizations focus solely on those who are under the age of 18. When 3/4 of all victims worldwide are over the age of 18, it's really hard to find resources for somebody who's experiencing trafficking and they have no out. It's important that we find out who these organizations are, what age groups they're willing and able to work with, and get people in touch with the right people.
So would you suggest to somebody wherever they live, just to network with some churchgoers or some other people to find out what networks are available in that area and kind of reach out locally? Is that probably one of the first things to self-vet in and amongst ourselves?
It's a great way of doing it. You can also contact the local organizations and ask them for clarity. What do you work on? What do you offer? How might I get involved? How can you educate me more on what human trafficking is or what it looks like? If they have the right answers for all of this, you're going to know. Yeah. You're going to feel that in your gut. These people know what they're doing. They have counseling services. They have housing available for survivors. You know, it's important to make sure that we are aware of where the money is going when we give them money.
Yeah, it's tricky because there's a lot of fronts out there that, appear to be one thing or another. And that's why, and I'll just shout out that, if you're listening to this podcast and you're just not sure, I would say a safe haven would be to go to OURrescue.org. Just go there. It's Tim Ballard's organization from, Sound of Freedom, and OURrescue.org. I'm sure they would be able to, at least maybe steer you to someplace. But certainly, it's just one of these things I did a podcast. I taped it already. It's going to appear in a couple of weeks called Stories Behind Stories. And I've always said that, if you took just one block in one development and you knocked on the door of one house and you said, can I write a chapter in my book about the life of your family? And if you just took one block and you wrote a chapter on, 15 houses, you'd have a best-selling book every book, because life is stranger than fiction. We can't make this stuff up. The unfortunate thing is in, human trafficking, what I've learned is most of the percentages fall into the fact that your traffickers. These are people that you know in your life. They're not strangers. They're people you know, and they take advantage of you. And you've heard some, you've heard some stories from your end. on that. And it's so, you just never know. You've got to really be vigilant out there and certainly on, social media. Don't fall for the bait. Don't start conversations with people you don't know. I mean, it's very, that's hard to easy to say, hard to do in many cases, but there's a lot of things that out there that, some of these good organizations and organizations like, OURrescue.org, they've got some pointers and some things you could dive into on their website and see some videos and see some other podcasts on people sharing how to, how to be cognizant of what's going on out there. So I think the world's waking up. Unfortunately, you're helping the world wake up through living it. And, for that, we just applaud you for being able to open yourself up here on the show and every week. I mean, I know every day, every week you're doing this on other shows and with other people. So thank you for that. And your links to how to get in touch with you, we're going to have them in the show notes on the YouTube video. So they will be there. So you can always see them on the show notes. And then throughout this video, you've seen little contact card appear in front of Amanda's name and right below her, and that's got some of her different URLs on it as well. So we're showing that during the podcast. So, anyway, what we'd love to do is just is there anything I forgot to ask you, Amanda, that's vital to this conversation and vital to this global situation?
I can't think of anything that you haven't actually asked, but I know there's a bunch of different statistics out there that would blow people's minds if they were to look them up. And I'd like to encourage people, if they want to know more about it, look it up. There's information that's available to you. Look it up on the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security. Understand that not everything that you're going to read is going to be 100% accurate. So make sure you're vetting these sources also. Mm-hmm. But there's millions of people in human trafficking. Right. Millions. Right. And people ask me sometimes to be careful with how you ask people these questions too. They ask me 3 times, you were trafficked 3 times. Didn't you learn anything the first time? That's like asking a rape survivor. 3 times, you were raped 3 times. Didn't you learn anything the first time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It has nothing to do with learning something from the abuse. Yeah. It has everything to do with people continuing to exploit the abused. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, what do you think's the biggest misconception out there in the general public about human trafficking? I mean, if you had to pinpoint it.
Well, it's like you said, most people that are trafficked by people they know and trust and love and have a sense of authority in their lives. Mm-hmm. We see so many scenarios of people posting on Nextdoor and on Facebook and on Instagram about, oh, I was almost human trafficked today, which I hate that term, because this person followed me through a grocery store. The person who's following you through the grocery store might be some guy who's trying to hit on you. They might be a serial rapist or they might be a serial killer. The odds are higher of them being one of those things than of them being a trafficker. Kidnapping scenarios in trafficking are rare. It is not what it looks like in the news. It is not what it looks like in the movies.
That's it. There you go. There's a big misconception right there. So, you're looking at the windshield, not the rearview mirror, and, you're humming a favorite song and you're saying, what's the biggest takeaway that I, Amanda Blackwell, have right now in my, in my purse with me? What's the biggest takeaway of life that I have right now? What is it?
Life is beautiful and worth living.
All right. Bingo. Beautiful. Beautiful. Find help, folks. Get the right support. Support's big. Gosh, thank you so much. So a little bit about your podcast. Again, I know you mentioned it. Just if you could, where can they find your podcast and what are the names of them?
My podcasts right now are audio only. So you're going to find them on all the audio platforms. It's on Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all over the place. The first one is called The Survivors, where I interview people like yourself, authors who have overcome their own traumas and written about them. And this is to offer help and support for people that are going through the same things and looking for that beacon of hope. They can find that beacon of hope in you. The other one is called Growth from Darkness, and that is about the trauma reactions, what the long-term consequences are, and how to fight back. My co-host lives in Australia, and we do this podcast every 2 weeks. And we've had so much fun with it that it's getting picked up and syndicated on Australian radio.
Wow. How cool. And is that on Podbean and Apple and all those places as well?
Yep,
Good,
exactly
good.
the same.
So, folks, we're on those platforms, too. When you sign up for Amanda's podcast, flip over and sign up for SimpleBiz360. We'd love to have you as a subscriber, too. Well, that's awesome. And, I know that we talked about this, and everybody has a song or songs that resonate with them, and we'll close on this, that really means something, to have some special significance, whether they're rock and roll, religious, instrumental or whatever. What's the song that today, as we tape this podcast, is near and dear to your heart?
It is the anthem of my life, Sound of Surviving.
Sound of Surviving. Wow. Awesome. And that's Nicole Nordman, correct?
Yep, that is correct. That song came out in 2019, I believe, which is about the same time that I discovered everything that was going on, and I started to dig deep and find the lion in my lungs. I became the sound of surviving.
I love it, the line in my lungs. I love how you phrase that. Well, your books, 13 of them, I think, right? There's quite a bevy of them. So a lot of them can be found in Barnes & Noble. Is that correct?
Yes. Every single book that I've written is available on barnesandnoble.com. You can actually Google them and find them on other platforms as well. But I always try to guide people to Barnes & Noble. It's going to be the easiest to be able to purchase. You can also find Kindle versions of my books on Amazon. You cannot find paperback book versions there.
Okay. And then what's the name of the book? If that the book that it tells your life story again, what's the name of it?
So my autobiography is called Custom Justice. And if you do find this one online, the cover of the book is one half of my face. Gotcha. So kind of hard to.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. There you go. Look at that. Yeah. You match it up well. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. Well, Amanda, it has been very eye-opening and enlightening, and we thank you for sharing your story. We know it's, we know there's a lot of, tender, delicate stuff that's the information that you've covered today. So we appreciate you digging down deep and sharing that. And we wish you all the best. And again, folks, we'll have all of the URLs listed on our show notes. You've seen it on the podcast as well. And Amanda, we wish you the best. Thank you for everything. September 15th, folks, I'm on her show. You'll find our podcast, which we've already recorded. So we will be together again on September 15th. And if you're ever out this way in St. Louis, please give me a call. My wife and I would love to meet you and get together with you if you're out this way at all.
I would love to hug you guys, and thank you for this.
All right, Amanda. Thank you. Amanda Blackwell, thank you so much. God bless you. And we will see you folks in 168 hours. All right. Thanks again, Amanda.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.